Warning: the following content includes real court documents from the Jeffrey Epstein investigation and references to abuse. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This program relies on publicly available court documents and witness testimony. The inclusion of a name in legal filings or discussion does not imply guilt or criminal conduct. All individuals are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Allegations are reported here for informational purposes only.
Welcome to the unredacted truth behind the Epstein Files. What you're about to see and hear is unlike anything reported by the mainstream media or released by the United States government. These are the original court files, headlines, investigative documents, transcripts, and depositions directly sourced from original public records with all victim and personal identifying information redacted. Some of the documents you're about to see are what's known as uncertified copies. Why? Because uncertified documents haven't gone through multiple bureaucratic hands. They haven't been sanitized, selectively redacted, or quietly modified. These files come directly from court archives, untouched since the day they were first scanned or uploaded. In other words, uncertified doesn't mean unreliable. This series is produced for public awareness, transparency, and journalistic integrity. Some of the materials may be disturbing or upsetting, including references to abuse, institutional failures, and alleged crimes. The inclusion of a name in a filing or discussion does not imply guilt or criminal conduct. If you are a survivor of abuse, or if this subject matter may be triggering, please watch with caution. I will be starting this series with the most debated and litigated evidence of the Epstein and Maxwell criminal prosecutions. The Billionaire's Playboy Club by Virginia Roberts. Throughout this investigative series, I will be presenting to you the facts as originally recorded and filed from officially unsealed court documents and records as per the amendment to Florida Bill CS-HB 117. They have called Virginia and the other victims liars, but I want to give them their voices back. I will be examining all 139 pages, and from there I will compare her accounts with real-world evidence, such as depositions, transcripts, exhibits, orders, and judgments as filed unsubmitted in court. Everything you hear is alleged as per Virginia Roberts' memoir filed in G versus Maxwell, plus witness and victim testimonies. Other than Ronald R. Eppinger, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell, none of the accused have been charged or found guilty by a court of law. I was not sure what the best way was to present these facts. There are nearly 10,000 pages and documents of court records, investigative notes, files, exhibits, and more. But I have decided Virginia should lead the way. So even in death, her story will still be told. Let's title Chapter 1, Ron Eppinger. Chapter 1 begins with a 13-year-old Virginia as a runaway camping out on Miami Beach in the summer of '97. I was 13 years old and hiding from a world full of hurt. sitting on the shoreline for hours watching the sunset fall deeper into the horizon. My eyes were glazed over with tears, not from being wind-whipped by the rough sea breeze, but from reflecting on the abuse I had encountered as a young child and how everyone in my life who was supposed to be there for me had now turned their backs on me in abandonment. On her third night camping out underneath the stars of Miami Beach, hungry and desperate in her situation, she sets out to find an empathetic stranger, hoping she wouldn't have to spend another night hungry. The excitement of escaping another group home had quickly faded away with the solitude she felt as everyone she approached simply turned her away. And reacting as a 13-year-old child would, she sat on a curb, placing her head into her knees and sobbed. When suddenly, a stretch black limousine pulled up. He introduced himself immediately as Ron Eppinger, a businessman who owned a successful modeling agency called Perfect 10, flaunting his oozing wealth by introducing one of his many girlfriends. The beauty next to him was Yana, a supposed model from the Czech Republic who looked like she would be in her early 20s with the heavy load of makeup she was wearing, but really was only in her late teens. She kissed me on both cheeks and politely said hello in a thick Czech accent, making me feel a little more at ease. Convinced it couldn't be that bad, there was another girl in the car, right? I couldn't be more wrong. What Virginia did not know was that Ronald R. Eppinger was the architect of a trafficking network, the first to recruit and trap the 13-year-old Virginia into a life of sexual servitude and abuse. Virginia's words in Chapter 1 detail the horrific experience she had with her first captor, Ronald Eppinger. From the start, Ron applied multiple tactics of manipulation, preying on her vulnerability and innocence. And of course, having Yana by his side, he was able to get the 13-year-old girl into his car and home with promises of a new life, family, and safety. I proceeded to introduce myself, besides what he had found out about me on the curbside, telling him my name and a little bit about how I ended up on the streets, explaining that I could take care of myself, and I didn't need my family or anyone else to look after me anymore. Looking back later in life, I can now admit I was in a terrible state. But being such a headstrong teenager, I refused to give in. He asked my age and I told him I was 16 at first. He coyly replied, "Are you sure? I think you could be telling me a fib. How old are you? Really? I won't be mad." Being a terrible liar, I knew I'd been caught out and couldn't deny it any further. I told him the truth and he chuckled, then paused, and answered in a very serious tone. "As long as you never lie to me again, I'll take you in." Right away I pondered to myself, what did he mean, take me in? Wanting to put her at ease, he told a story about a daughter who 7 years ago had passed away in a horrific car accident, and how difficult it was for him as a father to get over the loss, which got him the exact reaction he wanted, and so he turned up the heat, pretending that to one another they could finally be the father and daughter each had longed for. I reacted with sheer sympathy and gave him my pity, believing this man had a heart. His next proposal was eerie. He said, "If you wanted, I can be your new daddy." someone to take care of you, and you'll be my new baby forever. He stroked my head such as a caring parent would comfort a scared child. A part of me wanted to accept his words and believe he could really feel that way. And then I considered how hard it was living on the streets. In the end, I convinced myself this would be the lesser of two evils. We all know it was not. Before the child had a chance to think, Ron gave the driver instructions and swept her away for some food and shopping, and then took her back to his apartment overlooking the Isle of Biscayne. The car stopped at a plaza on the water, surrounded by little boutique shops, restaurants, and little stalls with items for sale like sunglasses and costume jewelry. I didn't know what to do or say or how to act. It all happened so fast that I just went along with everything he said for now. We went to a takeout restaurant and ate on the water side. And afterwards, he took me to Gap Kids Company to dress me in his idea of proper attire. Tiny cutoff shorts revealing the cusp of my buttocks and some shirts that barely fit. Even the sales assistant was shocked at what she thought was my grandfather's choice in clothing. I couldn't even believe it myself. Only an hour ago, I was begging for money living on the streets. And now I was dining al fresco and shopping at name brand outlets. We then hit a couple more specialty stores afterwards. He said he had to buy me a few more necessities to start with. Lacy G-strings, and what looked to me like lingerie pieces I had only seen grown women wearing in magazines or movies. That was now part of my wardrobe. In my mind, it was a big step up from being a little girl. The driver then took us back to Ron's grand apartment. He introduced her to her new home, family, and lifestyle soon after they arrived at the grand apartment. Her little mind went into survivor mode, which meant becoming who they told her to be. Entering the residence, I was blown away by the spectacular view, rich decor, and white marble floors that were so glossy it looked as if I was stepping on glass. He took my shopping bags to a large room at the back of the apartment and put them into a small closet. The room was considerably large, with glass exterior walls that maximized the potential of the panorama landscape, soaking in the seascape of Miami. In the room was a gigantic round bed raised off the floor by 3 steps and a mirror on the ceiling. When I asked him where I would be sleeping, he then sickly replied, "With me, silly. Where else, of course?" With no room for argument, I pretended to be okay with everything that my common sense was screaming out in my head to run. Next, I was taken down a long hall at the other end of the apartment to meet 5 more exotic beauties. 3 girls were in their late teens and the other 2 were in their early 20s. All of them were from the Czech, here under false passports provided by Ron and his contacts. Yana held my hand while introducing me to the group of girls as Baby, a pet name she came up with for me, being I was the youngest one of them, and the youngest ever to be brought in by Ron for that matter. It became my new identity, not even worrying to mention my real name to anyone anymore. My identity was no longer important to me. I wanted to become someone new, and Baby is who I was. Virginia was coaxed into a fantasy that lasted less than 12 hours. The 13-year-old's life soon revolved around pleasing Ronald's every perverted desire and being trained. A shocking first impression. The girls were completely nude, revealing their voluptuous young bodies with such a careless ease. And others were in just a G-string, similar to the ones Ron had bought me earlier. They were all stunning girls and full of life, charismatic and beautiful. They were the girls who should be on the front of billboards, not selling their bodies to old crude men for sex. Doing each other's makeup in front of the mirror and chatting away on the bed with no care in the world. Aiming at persuading me to see the highlights of the life Ron gave them, and they almost did. Ron left the room for a few moments, letting us all get to know each other a little better. And that's when I started to compile an understanding of what really went on here. Just catching a bit of their conversation from before my introduction, I heard them chatting about the night they were preparing for, speaking excitedly about some men they would be entertaining in a few hours. One girl was talking about going out to sea with one of these clients on a yacht for a few days. Since none of the girls seemed shy to talk about their profession, or anything for that matter, I decided to ask them a few questions about what they did. They were more than happy to expand on their point in their conversation, attempting to paint a pretty picture of what they were really paid to do. They all began to jump up and down with excitement like giddy schoolgirls at a slumber party. Another girl with jet black hair and a thick accent, wearing absolutely nothing at all, grabbed me onto the bed with them and into their fiasco, instantly making me feel accepted into their sorority, like I actually belonged somewhere for once. Yana went on to explain in a little more detail. We accompany the wealthy friends of Ron. They want only beautiful girls by their side, so we come and act however they want us to. But most importantly, we make them feel like we want them back too. Other girls began to jump in with their vivid points of view while playing with my hair. They were taking turns brushing and styling it as they're filling my head with all of the prospects that I could have as an escort too. They made me feel beautiful like them. Too beautiful for a girl like me. What a girl beyond my years should feel. I was simply being lured into a dangerous trap, just like they had been at a young age too. It pretty much came down to two things in their game: the money they would make and the lifestyle they were given. Their enthusiasm only interested me further, making it not only sound like an acceptable way of living, but also appearing to keep them all vivaciously satisfied. This way of life was just mind-blowing to even comprehend at first. With such a new outlook of the world to try and grasp at my very young age, I was listening to every word spoken to me with such an attentiveness. I was going to try and model what I was observing from the girls. I justified their way of thinking in my head for now, thinking, if all these girls seem happy enough, why couldn't I try to be? It was this or the streets for me. Fortunately, for the 13-year-old, this was as good as it was going to get. Ron came in and snatched her away to his private bathroom to get her acclimated to her new life and role, stealing her innocence, destroying her soul, and forever altering the course of her life. Her last memory of that fateful night was Ron handing her pills, aggressively groping her, and forcing her clothes off. Whether it be a blessing or a curse, because of those pills, Virginia soon blacked out and never discovered what other horrors happened to her that night. The next part of the story includes graphic and unsettling details. Listener discretion advised. Days turned into weeks, being a servant to the sexual desires of this distorted pervert. I dreamt of escaping, but where would I go? And how would I get away from Ron with him controlling every second of my day? Separating myself from the other girls, being so uncomfortable with enduring the everyday occurrences. I was longing for the solitude of the beach again. They were training me to be an escort prodigy or something like that. Outrageous orgies were conducted as my lessons, with the girls teaching me all of their tricks in the game. It was all for the sake of men's perverted fantasies. They didn't get anything from being sexually exploited and molesting each other except getting paid for it. Everything from oral penetration to penetration with toys, I was expected to not only to join in, but even perform ludicrous acts of hedonism. I was 13 years old and had never heard the terminology of these sexual acts before, and definitely shouldn't have been learning them firsthand. Thrown into a world of chaos, I didn't know what to do except be as compliant as possible, even when asked to do the most degrading tasks. The excitement of the lifestyle he offered quickly diminished once I had to pay so dearly for it. The girls that subdued to this lifestyle and enjoyed it definitely put on a good act. But no little girl with hopes and dreams of their untainted future turns to her mother and says, "One day, I dream of being a prostitute, passed around from man to man, only to grow older, regretting so much of my life." It was all part of an illusion that Ron painted for us that made it seem so alluring in the first place. Spending my days with Ron, he took advantage at every chance given. Even in his convertible, with the top down, I would be forced to go topless while he drove around. When I asked him why one day, it was supposedly so I could maintain an even suntan. But I knew it was his way of showing off his treasures. It was a far cry from the simple country life I had been raised in. Wearing designer miniskirts and tops that always revealed too much. Of course, due to Ron and the girls determining everything I wore, ate, or spoke. We would spend our days at hair laser clinics, shopping, tanning beds, and eating as little as possible. Through the nights, we're expected to become party animals and greet Ron's clientele with the most flirtatious, utmost attention, and doting as possible. Then whether we went out for dinner, at a party, or at a club, the man would choose his girl and take her home. Every girl had a different price, and so did the charges depending on the various clienteles. But Ron always kept me for himself. That August, she turned 14. And it wasn't a 14th birthday any little girl would want or wish for. But around that time, the FBI started to investigate Ronald Eppinger's business because finally, someone with eyes and a conscience said something. An anonymous call was made to the missing persons unit at the local police, identifying a very young girl as a possible victim of abuse living in the apartment. Now, unlike the other girls, Virginia looked young for her age, plus her blue eyes and freckles gave the impression of youthful innocence. When Eppinger was tipped off about a possible investigation, he carried the girls off and moved everyone to a ranch in Ocala, Florida, where he could wait for the heat to die down. Dwelling in sadness for the 14 years of suffering and loneliness I had already endured, the tears welled up in my eyes, trickling downwards, making my eyeliner inevitably leak down my cheeks. Inside, I felt so trapped and began to entertain the thought of jumping over the edge. It all seemed much easier than the simple blackness that death had to offer rather than the tangled mess I was so tired of fighting to get out of. Seemed a much easier approach. Detached from wanting to feel anything, I became so numb towards my life's own tragedies. I couldn't live like this any longer. I lifted my bare legs over the edge of the railing and sat, looking at the ground beneath me, so close to even just slipping off the edge to my very death. I couldn't think of any reason not to fall. I thought I made too many bad decisions to keep going on. But some force of a higher nature had other things in store for me. The sliding door slammed open with a burst of speed, and Ron scooped me up in his big arms and brought me inside to our bedroom. Laying me down and seeing the look of despair in my eyes and my tear-stained face, he went into the bathroom cupboard and returned with 3 pink pills. Forcing me to swallow them, using his angered tone of voice, he thought he was turning my sorrows into a distant dream as I passed out in his tight clutches, crying myself all the way to sleep. He'd even ask me what was wrong, probably because he already knew. Soon enough, the crumbling of his evil empire in the underworld of selling sex for his own advantage began with a single crack in his perfect scheme. And proudly, it all started with me. Ron got a scare one day and rampaged through his apartment, telling us girls to not only pack our important belongings and some clothes, as we all had to leave right away. I didn't have much belonging to me, so I basically sat there watching everyone rush around frantically. And I was curious, what could have gotten a man like Ron so scared? Once we were packed up and in the limo, he was trying to calm the frantic girls down after all the panic that spread through the apartment like wildfire. I was the only one sitting there half amused at the entire situation. He began by assuring us that everything was going to be fine. Calmly, he continued to tell all of us, packed in tightly, even for a limo, that we were all taking a long trip to Florida's countryside because someone has reported an anonymous tip to the missing persons unit at the local police station identifying a very young girl as a possible victim of abuse living in his apartment. Ron knew what a landmine of trouble he brought him upon himself, making an exhibition out of me on the streets of Miami. I didn't pull off looking older like the other girls. I actually looked younger than my age, with my blue eyes and freckles always giving the impression of youthful innocence. Now we had to do whatever it took to ensure we stayed far away from the authorities as possible. During this time, Virginia did her best to isolate and hide away until the evening. Whenever else, Ronald demanded that her and the girls entertain him. She would spend her days under a tree watching the horses graze, writing on her journal, dreading the nighttime. Ronald would start by plying the girls with pills and alcohol before defiling them to his satisfaction the rest of the night. Virginia started to sneak into a quiet room any chance she could get to talk to TJ. Tony, the childhood friendship that had developed into her very first crush, right before her world turned upside down. She missed Jenna, the girl she used to be. And after 3 months of no contact with any family or friends, she reached out to the only person she thought still cared enough to talk to her. Other than those brief moments on the phone with TJ, the rest of her days were filled with alcohol, Oxycontin, and abuse. But little did she know that those phone calls were being monitored, and she was being watched. The housekeeper soon after told Ron what she was up to, and after that, he decided she was too much of a liability. Not surprisingly, I began to despise Ron and all the girls for the gross exploits they made me do with them, beginning to isolate myself from everyone. I'd rather spend my time sitting under a tree watching the horses graze, writing in my journal, or painting, but mostly avoiding everyone as much as possible, unless Ron required me elsewhere. Nighttime was always a recurring nightmare, relived over and over again in many various ways. Ron would always start by making me some drinks and offering an assortment of pills before indulging himself by grotesquely putting his genitals in my mouth and telling me how to give him what he called a first-class, and I was being judged every minute of it. Ron liked to hurt us during sex. These nights went on what seemed like an eternal sentence for the price of not living on the streets, where unfortunately, for the ones still there, I feared and I knew from my own personal experience could be much worse. Needing some contact with someone of my adolescent mentality, I called out of one of my school friends from the past, whom I won't name out for privacy, but I'll call him TJ. We were so close, and I knew very well, so well, I had memorized his number a long time before. He was my first puppy love sprung from a childhood friendship, being my very first crush the summer before all this happened. My attempt to forge a happy voice when I spoke to him failed, and I absolutely crumbled. He was at a loss of kind words for me when I told him of my current state of affairs. Thinking I had slipped away unnoticed, I entered into the bedroom that I shared with Ron, hoping I got away with my brief and very needed phone call. The place looked empty and everyone else seemed to be out and about, so I decided to have a bath in the spa and try and relax before the night's precautions. My body glided into the steamy water as I began to think about TJ and how good it felt just to hear from a friendly voice. My thoughts drifted into the days I missed, when I felt I could be silly and childlike, and I nearly forgot for a moment how grown up I was acting these days. My first glimpse at the image surrounding me when I resurfaced above the water was daunting. There was Ron, standing over my tub looking down at me with an eager display of his arousal. He began to undo his pants and take them down when he told me, "Put your lips on my..." I was too slow in responding to his request, so he grabbed me by the back of my head and forced me into his groin. I had tears streaming down my face as I looked up at him with the saddest blue eyes, hoping he would take pity and stop, but he never did. Left alone, I was awake for hours. There was no escaping the pain that night. I lay naked in the sheets, sobbing in the dark. My feelings of being hurt and disgusted after his abusive ordeal. When will it ever stop? I prayed to God and begged for death rather than face another day in my life. I woke up still alone the next day and exasperated from the misery I felt the night before. Starting my day with a few of the supplied Oxycontins and a Bloody Mary. Desperate to hear his voice, I called my friend TJ a few more times that week. I needed to feel like someone out there really knew me. Sometimes we would just chat like old friends, with no care in the world, and laugh at a distant memory from too long ago. Then would come the goodbye part, and we would both get teary-eyed not knowing what could happen next, or if this would even be the last time we ever spoke to each other again. My biggest fear came to reality when I was in our bedroom one afternoon, just lounging around out of boredom. Ron came bursting in through the door, red as a tomato. I couldn't help but feel I was in big trouble. His face was distorted and raging towards me. I knew right away he must have found out I was calling TJ. He was tearing up the room, but his rants gave me something else to think about. What would he do with me if he had no use for me any longer? I replied with simple sentences that I could manage to get out between all the shouting. I kept saying, "I'm sorry," and putting my head down in shame. He picked me up by my throat, pinning me against the wall. I slid down the wall, choking on the first air entering my lung, breathless and terrified. I never thought Ron was a nice guy, but I've never seen him lose it this bad. Now I was being sent away to another stranger, another man. It only terrified me more. The girls came in to say their goodbyes. All of them were crying and asking me in their best English languages why I had to call someone and lose everything. I was able to find out through the broken sobs of the girls that the confession came from the housekeeper, who said she saw me use the room regularly, but it was never messed up. So Ron looked at the recent phone bills and found the same number dialed from the room consecutively. He knew it was me right away. At least he didn't know it was another guy, I thought to myself. Or probably I wouldn't have made it out of there alive. Chapter 1 ends with Virginia being forced to quickly pack and being firmly warned to only take the few clothes she had, leaving behind all her books, music, and anything else she once owned. She was taken on what one can only imagine was a very quiet and very long drive back to Miami to meet her new owner, or should we call it handler. Virginia has been placed on a pedestal of shame as the face of the Epstein investigation, being called a liar, censored, and sued for defamation. Although she was once silenced, and other victims along with her, I am going to allow her voice to lead us through the uncovering of facts and to the unredacted truth. Between each chapter, I will be looking at the real-world evidence that either corroborates or negates the facts as she alleges in her book. So in episode 2, I will take the focus away from Virginia's memoirs to real-life evidence. That is, court files, evidentiary notes, and deposition records that pertain to this period of her life. Before moving forward onto the rest of the chapters, which highlight the time she was working for Ghislaine and Epstein. What I want to achieve with this limited podcast series is to give the victims what they've been asking for, their voices back. And now we get to hear all 3 sides of the story, engage our critical thinking, and hopefully get our questions answered. Although minor victim identities remain redacted, I am choosing to hold back all victim names as I read their words across depositions and investigation notes. If the words you hear sound like yours and you want to speak out and come forward, that is your choice. And if you choose to leave that chapter of your life in the past and prefer to focus on what can be and not what was, that too is your choice. Though many names will be mentioned, some we know, others powerful, none of the accused have been charged with any crimes in a court of law except for Ronald R. Eppinger, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jacques-Luc Brunel. Just because someone is mentioned does not automatically mean they were directly involved in child or human trafficking. Think about it like the Diddy White parties. Some knew, some did not, and others were used as pawns. And this brings us to the conclusion of episode 1 of the unredacted truth behind the Epstein Files. Join me in uncovering this saga. In episode 3, we will take a look at the complete Epstein grand jury transcripts. So, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and follow if you're tired of the games and just want to get to the unredacted truth.